and welcome back to Book Banter. Virginia Woolf is quoted as saying, "For most of history, Anonymous was a woman." Historical fiction author Gill Paul is doing her bit to make sure that doesn't remain the case. Gill Paul is the best-selling author of 12 historical novels, many of them about real women from the past whom she thinks have been marginalized or misjudged by historians. Her novels have reached the top of the charts in USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and the Toronto Globe and Mail, and have been translated into 22 languages. Let's welcome Gill to Book Banter.
Hi.
Hello,
Tanya.
It's good to see you.
I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
We are so happy to have you because I didn't put this in our questions, but I have to say, I love this one as well.
Oh, did you?
Manhattan Girl.
Oh,
I
thank you.
absolutely loved it. I absolutely
Aw.
loved it. Because of you, I was introduced to the Algonquin Hotel, which on our last trip to New York, we went and visited.
Did you?
What an amazing place.
It really is. I went there last year and had a couple of cocktails for Dorothy, as she would have wanted me to. Did you see? I mean, it's all been done up. The decor has been changed, but they've still got the same tiny little staircase that you go down to the ladies' room.
washroom.
And I just imagine Dorothy in her high heels tottering down there after a few
with a few drinks under. I thought the exact same thing.
Yeah.
As I was like, oh, I'm wearing like runners and
I had trouble.
Little corkscrew of a stairway. It was pretty cool, I have to say.
It really was.
What was astonishing to me was that in your novel you indicate how she dodged her rent and everything like that. But how in the world did she get past anybody to get to her apartment? It's so tiny.
And holding a dog when you weren't supposed to have dogs there. She would just sneak past the doorman to the lifts.
I thought it was crazy because I was eyeballing everything going, how did she manage that? She was a crafty woman, that's for sure. So, friends, if you haven't read The Manhattan Girls yet, you should definitely pick up a copy because this was fantastic. Fantastic. Set in New York, you're gonna love it. It's kind of like it has that Christmassy vibe to it. So
yeah, do you think? Okay.
Yeah, like a holiday reading. Like
there,
yeah. So I would, November. That's a good time to read.
Fabulous.
But we are here to talk about A Beautiful Rival. Loved it. It's such a great book. It follows the lives of competitive natures of Elizabeth Arden and Helena Rubinstein. Rubinstein? Okay. Can you tell us how that? I know, right? I wasn't sure when I was writing it out. I was like, okay. Can you tell us how that idea for that story came to be? Because that was so unique.
I was just crawling around Google trails when I'm choosing the subject for the next book. Probably like you, we've got a file of ideas that I kind of run down, and I think you're trying to decide what's got some kind of relevance today, as well as something that you feel like writing about. And sometimes you want a complete change from the last subject. I usually do.
Absolutely.
And sometimes readers send me ideas, which is wonderful. And I love it when that happens. And I always put them on my list with the reader's name and email beside it, because if I decide to write that one, I will dedicate the book to them. That's my promise.
That's sweet.
But, Helena, Elizabeth, I was just Googling around people that I was interested in, and I came across a mention of the fact that these two phenomenal women who basically invented the modern beauty cosmetics industry had been fierce rivals, that they'd had this feud that lasted 50 years. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Googled a bit more, and there's a non-fiction book, like a double biography of the two of them called War Paint by Lindy Woodhead that came out in 2003. So I got that book and read that, and I really highly recommend it. But it's non-fiction, so she's very stuck with the facts, and there are big gaps in what she's done. And in particular, she can't do what I do as a historical novelist, is that I pretend to tell you what they were feeling, how they felt about each other, what they thought about each other, why both of them, who they both came from very poor backgrounds and completely created these global empires, why did they do that? Why did they not just set up one little salon and lead a nice, happy life? It's, you know, that was the real interest to me. But the feud mainly, like two women in a lifelong battle like that. Hey, there's a spark behind every novel, and that was the one for me. And
Spark.
beautiful
I
art.
could see. I could totally, and the title is great too. It's fantastic.
That wasn't my I never get to keep my titles. I can't even remember what my title was for this one. But yeah, that goes backwards and forwards. I think that was the UK publisher came up with that one. I give up
Good
on
one.
titles. It's not my thing.
I'm not great at titles either.
Oh, hi to Emma Bennett. It's nice to see people
Oh,
arriving on the side.
comments coming in.
Yay.
Nice. I always forget we have that screen. That's awesome. Thank you for noticing that. One of the things that I thoroughly enjoyed was the strong female spirit among the two. But I was surprised by how, in an era where it wasn't necessarily encouraged for women to rise to the top of any business, there were two fighting it out in the cosmetics industry. Where did your research take you to gain such an immersive understanding of they're very accomplished and determined women, but that had to have been like a lot of detailed research to get to that.
Well, absolutely, because it was just, until then, it was really, really hard for women to get going in business. It was only in the mid 19th century, depending where you are, late 19th century, that women were even allowed to inherit the family business. If there was any male relative there, he could just snatch it away from them.
Yep.
There's absolutely no way they could get a bank loan. Absolutely none. And I found out one statistic. It was 1988 in the United States where before women could apply for venture capital without having a male signatory. 1988. Can you believe that?
88.
I know, I fell off my chair. So there's not that many, huge global business women before them. They really, really were breaking ground. And both of them came from quite poor backgrounds. In Elizabeth's case, very, very poor. Her father was a tenant farmer in Woodbridge, Ontario. Helena's was a kerosene salesman in Krakow, Poland. And so they came from very little, and they just, this is what fascinated me. They were absolutely driven. They started in different ways. Elizabeth started working in a salon of Eleanor Adair in Manhattan and learned all the kind of massage, the facial strapping techniques where they pull your face, the weird things they did back then. Helena started more from the pharmaceutical point of view. She learned how to mix creams from an old Australian pharmacist. And they used sheep's lanolin from the sheep's skins, which is a natural moisturizer, but it stank, absolutely stank. So that's why you have to add in all the nice perfumes so that it's not kind of like just putting sheep muck on your face. So they came at it from different angles. But as I said, both of them could have just had one or two salons, one or two products. But they were both such driven, determined characters that they wouldn't stop there. Helena had a world domination plan right from the start. She planned it out much more than Elizabeth did. And when she arrived in New York, 1914, 1915, she already had a plan in the back of her head. She arrived, she went looking for a Manhattan salon, and then she set off on a great big tour around the States to visit department stores, persuade them to stock her products and to become Helena Rubinstein girls. She was training them how to use her products. She was just so driven. She was always the figurehead, the marketing genius behind her brand in a way that Elizabeth, who wasn't quite so striking looking. She wasn't bad looking at all.
No.
But she didn't want to be the figurehead in her brand. She hired models to do all that.
Which is interesting and actually smart for longevity wise.
Yeah, I guess.
But
Helena had a niece who came along and took over being the kind of the face of the product. Elizabeth was much more about the appearance of her products, and what drove her really was she was a snob. She wanted to be like these glamorous Park Avenue women who she treated in her salon with the furs and the diamonds, and she really reinvented herself from that little girl, the farmer's daughter in Ontario. She changed her accent completely. She tried to learn how they talked and shopped, be just like them. And of course, you could never entirely be accepted in that kind of New York society when you work in trade. So she was
No.
bashing her head against a brick wall there anyway.
Yeah, because you're kind of born into that kind of society
Yeah,
back then,
yeah.
right? So
I mean, you
it's
can marry
interesting.
into it to an extent, but there's always
Right.
people
Yeah.
that will, you know, I'm talking about that
It's that
generation.
era.
It's different
Yeah.
now. You get famous in different ways now and rich.
Totally. Totally different. It's, it's interesting because then it kind of, which might be why their characters were so unique, because Elizabeth seemed to really come from that place of insecurity and
Mm.
wanting to become something that she felt she wasn't,
Yeah.
where Helena was very confident in her own abilities and seemed to come from it from a different approach.
She did, but she was pretending to be something she wasn't as well. She was telling everybody that she'd studied medicine when she was in Krakow, and that she'd studied skin science with all the top European experts, and that she, you know, her creams contained these rare anti-aging Carpathian herbs, which nobody's ever been able to track down, strangely, and which she
Really?
seems to be able to source, even though she was living in Australia when she started her business. It was all about the image and the mystique, and people fell for
Huh.
it completely. You know, she had this Parisian exoticism that they felt that
Interesting.
yeah.
And we still do today.
I know. Well, their
I mean,
message, and they were the first, because before them you had kind of cold creams, you had glycerin and rose water, but they were the first that really did big campaigns that said to women, it's your duty to be beautiful. You know, if you
right,
don't work at keeping your skin young, then you'll lose your husband. This kind of thing.
right?
He won't love you so much.
Fear mongering.
You're a young woman. I mean, it's really quite shameless what they were telling people. Helena famously said, "There's no such thing as an ugly woman, only lazy ones." So there you go.
She would think I'm lazy.
Oh, you're gorgeous.
Oh, I'm so not into the makeup thing. It's like I struggle with that. I would prefer not to wear it. That would be my preference.
Yeah,
It's
me too.
just,
I mean, no, I don't unless I'm doing something like this.
exactly, exactly,
Mm.
yes. When I go to the grocery store, I don't look like
Oh
this.
God, no, I don't do that.
Ball
Definitely
cap
not.
involved.
Mm.
So was there one bit of research that really stood out to you as fascinating, that something that just grabbed you?
Absolutely loads. I mean, these women were just phenomenal. They were so um, bizarre. But Helena, I suppose, is more eccentric, and she, as well as all the business, and she had a husband and two kids, but she was hugely influential on the art scene in Europe as well. She was collecting all the avant-garde artists from very early days, Braque and Picasso even. And I mean, she
Wow.
knew them all, and she could wander into Picasso's studio and get him to do a few sketches of her. She commissioned Salvador Dali to do a triptych for the card room in her Park Avenue duplex. She knew everybody. She supported a lot of young artists. She supported a lot of African artists as well.
Mm,
Just she spoke about her art collection. It was just her personal taste. And
really?
sometimes, when she died and her collection was auctioned, some art experts were saying that she's got all the top artists of the day, but not necessarily their best works, because she would support them on the way up. She was trying to create them. Very
She had
generous about lending her
Oh,
collection for exhibitions. Yeah, so I really admire that about her. Both
interesting.
women, there are things that I really, really admire about them, particularly their drive in business and the fact that,
Yes.
they were just doing better than any man, really. They created
Yeah.
vast industries, multi-million dollar industries. But they both had very negative sides as well. Like
They're very complex for
Elizabeth
sure.
job, and she had the kind of casual, unthought out anti-Semitism that was quite common
Yes.
in the day. Helena was just an appalling wife and mother, the worst mother ever.
I felt that.
Yeah. Oh well, you can't have everything.
Yeah. And
I got
really that
money
is
from her, if not love and affection and attention.
it's hard to be all things to all people, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but you choose to have children.
Have yeah.
But a different time too, where um, everything they did was an uphill battle because they had to reinvent the system to suit their gender and their goals
And I think what
and
drove
their
them more than anything else after
nationalities.
1915 was battling each other, trying to get one up
Yeah.
on each other. I mean, Helen in particular just thought of this as a battle that she was determined to win. So they're kind of, I mean, it escalates as well. So they start
Yeah.
off just planting negative stories in the press and sabotaging each other's advertising campaigns. And then they're copying each other's products. As soon as the one's got a new product coming out, the other will have it very soon afterwards on the shelves. But then it goes into poaching staff in the 1930s.
Yes.
And it got a
That
whole lot darker as fascism was rising in Europe because, of course, Helena's family are
well,
Jewish
that's
and were
it.
stuck over there. And
Yeah.
Elizabeth was dining with Nazis through her
That
sister
was
Gladys, who was married to a French count. She was having dinner with Hermann Goring, and her Bond Street London salon was lent out for fascist meetings. Probably she didn't know about it. But yeah, so it got a whole lot darker then. And there is something that absolutely fascinates me in Elizabeth's FBI file. There's a note
was
that's
an FBI file.
she has enough. Yeah. In 1941, somebody wrote to the FBI accusing her of being a fascist sympathizer. And that has now become available, but the name of the person that sent the letter has been redacted. I thought, I bet I know.
Yeah.
I might be
It's a
wrong.
pretty good bet. I bet if there's even a breadcrumb, you could trace it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Wow, because they were ruthless, like, towards one another, they were absolutely ruthless.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and even in their relationships, like, when you compare how they dealt with the men in their lives, they were quite ruthless as well.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Was it more common in those days to set a private investigator on your husband? Because they both did it.
Both did
And
it.
rightly so, as it turns out. They both
Yes,
found things out. But yeah, no, they
very
were
true.
you can't have everything, as we were saying earlier, and, lucky in business, unlucky in love, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, or maybe just
Yeah,
too driven in the world's view, not necessarily in their own view, but in the world's view
yeah,
so that it impacts or just always if you're that driven, you don't wanna let go of the control,
I
and
know.
so
Yeah.
then letting that other person into your life completely is very difficult to do,
Mm. And
but
obviously,
it's
they wanted to hang on to this money that they'd made all by
yeah,
themselves.
no
Yeah.
kidding,
And
and
it's
they've done it
really
themselves essentially.
Elizabeth in particular was just, I always felt, one of the loneliest people in the world. And she
Yes.
had no common sense, no instincts whatsoever with the men that she chose. She just got it all wrong. Right from
And she seemed to me to be very reactionary. Like, she
yeah.
just instead of thinking ahead and planning, she
Mm.
just kinda reacted to things, and
Looking for men to raise her social status, really, and that's,
yeah.
maybe not the best
No,
advice to give to young people today.
I wouldn't think so. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting approach, but then again, understanding what their lives were like in
Mhm.
that era where they, like you say, couldn't get a loan, couldn't, you know,
I know.
they were in a business that didn't
Well, in their
exist before.
generation, loads of women would be raised and encouraged to marry a man who would keep them in style,
Yes,
to marry for
absolutely.
money. I mean, Jackie Kennedy was, and look, she had
Yeah.
JFK and then Onassis. Her mother trained them to find a wealthy man and settle down. They weren't trained for any career. She found that herself later.
Yeah. And not to mention that when you're trained to do that, then you don't really know how to judge what you really want out of that.
Mm.
It
Yeah.
becomes sort of unfulfilled, I would
Character will
think.
be compatible with you, all the things, for me, the
Wow.
single most important thing in a relationship is shared sense of humor, I think,
Absolutely.
Not just
I
intimacy
agree.
them.
I absolutely agree with that because it's so true. Because when you have nothing else, you at least have to find something funny in the world.
Mhm. Indeed. Yeah.
Totally. I completely agree. So what was interesting is, I mean, we're very well known. Elizabeth Arden's very well known as a brand. We still hear about it today.
Mhm.
But Helena Rubinstein brand, it's not like we know the brand. So I'm curious, did her children actually take over
Yeah, yeah.
or
No, her
oh they
brand's
did.
still around. Yeah, you can still find
Okay.
it online. Very expensive. It's
Ah,
so I mean, this is another really curious fact that I came up with in the research is as they got older, and this is not covered in the novel, but as they got older, Elizabeth didn't do any tax planning whatsoever for what or plan what would happen to the business after she died. And she was 88 when she died. I mean, why not? It's just bizarre. So when she
she's
died,
funny.
her heirs were left with this huge tax bill and they had to sell the company to cover it at quite a knockdown price.
Oh,
Whereas Helena Rubinstein, who'd always been the better businesswoman, you know, the much bigger kind of thinker in terms of business, she'd transferred the company into the Helena Rubinstein Foundation, which was run by her son, her surviving son, Roy,
exactly.
and her nephew, Oscar. And when they sold it in the 70s for 4 times what Elizabeth's had gone for.
Wow.
And they sold it to finally, not straight away, but in 1988, it was sold to L'Oreal, which would have had Helena
Oh.
turning in her grave because L'Oreal had been set up by Eugene Schuller, who was accused of being a bit too friendly with the Nazis in occupied Paris,
Oh.
who had a lifelong battle against anti-Semitism, would not have been happy to see her company
I
going. But
bet
you know,
not.
when her heirs had sold it, you know, it was just always going to go on to the highest bidder. But yeah, it does still exist for sure.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I
Mm.
guess the Arden name is just so much
Do you know, her
more
products
mainstream.
just became better known, and a lot of my friends' mothers used the 8 Hour Cream, which was it's still very popular.
Interesting.
And
Is
Prince Harry wrote about it in his recent memoir.
really
You know,
really?
it's a little
That's
bit rude.
hilarious.
He said he got, you don't mind me being a little bit rude. He said he got frostbite in his todgers in one
Oh,
army exercise in the North Pole, and he put Elizabeth Arden 8 Hour Cream on it because he said he remembered his mother used to use it on chapped lips, and there's
he
something just a
figured
tiny bit Freudian about that. It's just let's not go there.
it's a little bit. Yeah,
But
just a
yeah,
little bit.
nice of him to advertise Elizabeth Arden's products for her in that way. And of course, her blue grass perfume and her red door perfume are
Yes,
still top sellers.
still.
Helena's have gone,
Exactly.
they're much more exclusive. She has these really expensive serums. I don't know, I haven't tried them. I have tried 8 Hour
Isn't
Cream. It seems good. I mean, it actually
does
helps
it? Yeah.
wound healing. It's a funny purple kind of cream, yeah.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I've ever bought it, so
That's why it was called 8 Hour Cream, because one of her employees, I think, put it on her son's scraped knee, and the knee healed faster
wow.
than usual.
Oh,
Supposedly.
that is
Supposedly.
okay. That's interesting, and that's a really good segue into my next question because I was like, "Hmm."
Mhm.
So was any of their products deemed to be unproven or unhealthy, or is that just something we don't
Amazingly,
talk about in cosmetics?
amazingly not. They both got into trouble when the Food and Drug Administration in the 1930s tightened up rules, and they both had to change the names. That they had products like orange skin food or something. They called their products food, and Elizabeth
Oh,
Arden in
I
particular was
see.
very grumpy at having to take the word food off. She said, "Well, you could eat them if you wanted to," you know. Um,
In the 30s, people aren't spending their money to do
no.
that.
Well, except they did, you know, Great Depression, you know, the rich women were paying $500 a week to stay in Elizabeth Arden's health spa at the
Really?
time when, you know, a vast proportion of the country were below the poverty line. It was a huge divide.
That's
But
crazy.
yeah, no, theirs were never deemed dangerous because they weren't
Interesting.
doing what people do nowadays, which is injectables, you know, invasive
Yeah.
treatments that you actually put inside your skin or inside your body, or surgery, or no,
Yes.
things that you put on the outside of your
Topical.
skin, and massage and so forth. So
Yeah, they were big into that, which makes sense actually. The massage makes sense because it's
mm,
blood cell circulation and
yeah,
everything. But that's really interesting because I did wonder. I was like,
yeah.
what
Nobody
lawsuits
died of
didn't
using
happen?
the little garden cream. You heard it here.
Oh dear.
She was much
Interesting.
more about the packaging, whereas Helena
Yes.
was very into her new product research. So Helena, near the end of her life, she said, if we'd put together Elizabeth's packaging and my products, we could have ruled the world. But when I
Yes.
thought about that quote, I thought that's a real put down. She's saying she's got the better products and Elizabeth's is only about the okay.
He's coming off as being altruistic and yet still
Yeah,
taking a
still
jab
it's
at.
a big yeah.
Yeah, ruthless to
Never
the
missed a
core.
trick. Never missed
Right?
a trick.
Well, one of the things that I think was really wonderful about the novel was how well balanced both sides were because there's such strong characters. It would have been easy to have them be unweighted and have one rise above the other. And writing dual point of view is difficult anyway
Yeah,
because just of that balancing act.
yeah.
And you did such a great job. It was
Oh, thank
absolutely
you.
spot on. Honestly, it's one of those. Do you know when you read a dual timeline and you're like, okay, can I skip ahead so I can read the next person,
Mm,
keep going with the same person's point of view? I didn't
mm.
have that at all. I was like so immersed and engrossed in both of them, which is fantastic. So well done.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That's
So
really I'm always very aware of that when I write dual timelines, is that you don't need to like both characters the same, but you need
no,
to be invested in their story just as much. Um,
exactly.
you need to want to know what's going to happen to them next. And as I said,
Absolutely.
Elizabeth is kind of harder to like because of the snobbishness and the
She's
anti-Semitism and the kind of
absolutely.
insecurity as well. Whereas Helena is just this force of nature. So, but
Yes.
this they're actual real stories in most cases. There was plenty of plot for both sides. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly I made up bits, little
Well,
bits, yes.
so that's what I'm curious about. Was
Well, you have to, when you're, I mean, biographical fiction,
yes,
you've got to just pull out a story, and sometimes it doesn't work exactly, so you've got to shift the timeline a bit or
absolutely.
introduce a new character, or for example, I knew that they obviously had to have spies in each other's businesses.
Yes.
They must have done,
Yeah.
but I
An
don't know
urgent.
who they were, and it's not been reported, so I had to invent a character called Edith that
Right.
Helena planted in Elizabeth's main salon in Manhattan, who proved very useful.
Yeah. I bet. That actually makes a lot of sense. And also is good because then you're not calling out somebody in history historically
Yeah,
either, which is kind of it's a nice way to do it while still getting the story across and the
yeah.
meat and potatoes of it across. And I was actually curious if the scene that takes place when the two women meet in Elizabeth's apartment was fiction or fact.
Aha. In fact, there's no record in any of the biographies of them ever meeting at all. Um,
Really?
but they
Huh.
must, I mean, I'm sure they must have had some, like walking into a restaurant, seeing the other one was there and
Mm,
turning around and walking out again. And
yeah.
so I included a couple of little brushes like that they might have had. But no, I mean, as a novelist, you can see if you've got two women who are rivals and you're telling both their stories, you need to, just from story
Yes.
sense, you need to have them meet in the end. That's
Absolutely.
true of everything from like a superhero movie through to great literature. If you've got two rivals, they've got to meet at some point. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I had to invent
It
that
was so
scene
good.
and try to make it work by using the same character that I'd created for both of them. And it is a creation because anybody, somebody else could write about Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden and come up with quite a different picture than I did. I mean, I just formed
It's
my
true.
own impression from what I read and based on my own life experiences. And as novelists, that's all we can do, isn't it? We've got to
Absolutely.
make our own suppositions. So, but so long as you keep a kind of coherence to the characters that you've created all the way through and don't have them suddenly changing in the middle.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, they were very consistent
when I'm making
all the way through.
so I'm that kind of character that I've created for both of them. I just made sure that was consistent when they came into the final clash.
I loved it. I love that.
It was great fun to write.
See them doing it.
Right, and it was one of those scenes that came very easily, in fact.
I bet, because when they do meet, it's really it's powerful. It's and you gain even more insight into probably all of the research that you did to give us that insight just in that moment. It was brilliant. I love that. It's so good. And the historical tie-ins were something else. It always amazes me when you read a novel and all of a sudden all these connections from like different places join up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that. I found that in Manhattan Girls as well. I was like, oh, can you believe this? Like, did you totally get excited when you learned who Helena was married to?
Yeah. My novels all join up now. It's just so many weird coincidences about them. But I suppose I'm writing about 20th century kind of people in the arts and business in this case. So I guess there'll be some joining up at some point. But yeah, Helena was her first husband was Edward Titus, who was a very esteemed and respected literary publisher and magazine publisher and a poet himself and an art collector. And he started a bookshop in Paris. Of course, this is Paris. It's it's the literary decade in Paris in the 1920s.
Absolutely.
So he knew Sylvia Beach, for example, with her bookshop Shakespeare and Company, where she first published James Joyce. And Edward Titus comes along, and he produced the first easily available edition of Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, which really launched his Black Mannequin Press. And he published really good translations of French poets, Baudelaire, Rimbaud. I think all kinds. He was just quite a phenomenal. He had a magazine, a modernist magazine as well, where he had a surrealism issue, and he was absolutely cutting edge intellectual in those days. But it wasn't just him that wandered into my novel. It was like Wallis Simpson. I'd written about her several novels before, and she disappeared in this one.
I was like, wow, look at that.
I didn't invite her. I mean, in London, Elizabeth Arden's salons were run by a very upper class man called Teddy Haslam. And when I was reading about him, of course, he was a friend of Wallis Simpson's. And when she was before she married, before the abdication crisis, when Edward, Prince of Wales, stepped down from the throne to marry her, she used to have what were called KT hours, cocktail hours, at her London apartment. And so Elizabeth Arden was invited to that. And then later, Wallis, after she was married to Edward, by then the Duke of Windsor, she was the Duchess of Windsor, she used to come to Elizabeth's Paris salon. So she was in there. And somebody else who I've, Lady Diana Cooper, who was the wife of the British ambassador in Paris, she was there in September 1944, just after the occupation of Paris ended. She and her husband, they were, as the British ambassador, they flew straight in as the Germans were driven out. And I've always loved Lady Diana Cooper. She's an extraordinary, unfortunately, my publishers won't she's not well enough known for my publishers to let me write a whole novel about her. But I'm going to have her creeping into a few things, I think, because I think she's extraordinary, wonderful socialite. And what's more, I knew her son. I've worked with her son, John Julius Norwich, who died just about 3 years ago now. But I've worked with him on several historic projects, and he was the most charming, delightful man I think I've ever worked with in my entire career. I adored him.
Oh, nice.
Diana. And he's written about her. She sent him amazing letters, and he's collected them and published that and written about their relationship. So yeah, she crept in as well, and several other people. They just appear. And hey, you again. The links.
I like that. I like the thread, because it's really what you're doing through fiction is like making the world of the 20th century sort of come together and make sense as a whole.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you can't write 20th century without war as a backdrop. It's just part of it. And I love how it's there, it's going on, there's moments of it, but yet it's not a World War II novel. Like,
No.
that's I and I think that that's where historical fiction will be sort of leaning, is now we know a lot more about the war. We can
Mhm.
write it as a backdrop without it being the center focus,
Yeah.
which is really nice.
I've
So
never
you're making the 20th century make sense for everybody.
Oh, I wish. I've never written a war novel or wanted to particularly because there's so many great
Mhm.
authors doing that already.
Yes, I agree.
And also, I just don't like writing about violence and yeah, it's
Yeah,
just not my
it's
thing.
a hard one.
It's not my
It's a
thing.
hard one
I
because
like
I
glamorous
glamorous.
cocktails and nice frocks. Not that they're superficial. They're women with,
Yeah,
who achieved a lot for their generation, who like really
absolutely.
broke down boundaries that have held women back. That's the
Oh,
kind
that's
of person I want to write about.
absolutely, because they were doing so quietly, and they were
Mm.
doing it, without a lot of people noticing, and
Well, you
that's
say that. Elizabeth and Helen are not so quiet, maybe.
not so much.
They were
Yeah,
bold.
vocal, but
Oh,
they're
I can
probably the exception.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah, they're probably the exception to the rule. The
Mm.
other thing that I thought was really neat actually was, Elizabeth's connection with, Tom Smith.
Mhm.
So Elizabeth had horses,
Yeah,
lots of horses, which
they
is
were her
not an
babies, yeah.
inexpensive habit. Horses are expensive, but so maybe tell us a little bit about Silent Tom, because people may not know who
Silent
he is, or
Well, he's another person that walked into my novel from a previous one. I wrote 3 novels ago, The Collector's Daughter, which is about Lady Evelyn Herbert, the first person inside Tutankhamun's tomb when it was discovered in November 1922. And she loved the horse racing. She was always going, and she had horses and she was betting on the horses, and she was very well known in the racing community. So I posted on Facebook, are any of my friends into horse racing, and can I ask you some questions just to make sure I made it sound authentic? And an author called Rosie de Guzman got in touch with me, and she was really helpful. And she said to me, read the book Seabiscuit, which is about a horse in the 1930s trained by Tom Smith, who became, and it was a sort of runty little horse, and it became this
yeah,
great champion. And I read
yeah.
Seabiscuit, and it told me like everything, and it's a brilliant book, told me everything I wanted to know about racing. So imagine my surprise when I'm researching Elizabeth Arden, and up pops Tom Smith because she hired him to look after her horses. I forget what year it was, late 30s, early 41 maybe, 1941 I think it was. And he came in and was buying horses for her and training the ones that she had and running the stables. Now, Elizabeth treated her horses like her babies. She never had babies. These were her children, and nothing was too good for them. She flew in a particular kind of blue clover from Maine because she'd heard they liked that best. She
Wow.
had hanging baskets in their stalls. She rubbed down their legs and their manes with her products, her Ardena skin lotion. And before and after a race, she would massage their legs herself.
I
And
love that.
Tom came along and he saw what she was doing, and he was like, okay. And they had this. She'd sacked all her trainers before. She never agreed with their methods. She didn't want her horses to be whipped. She didn't like them
Yeah.
using blinkers.
Mhm.
And so Tom said, okay, we can do that. And she said, and I want to rub my creams into their legs. And he said, okay, if you want. And he didn't contradict her, but as soon as she left, you could tell he was just doing things his own way, because he really built up her stables to the
Yeah.
extent that in 1947 she won the Kentucky Derby with her horse Jet Pilot. And
I was so
she had lots
surprised.
of other successes, but that I believe the Kentucky Derby is the big one. So very successful. And she stuck, and she usually was a big one for sacking employees. She had like a revolving door in her salon. If you displeased her remotely, you were out. But with
We're out.
Tom, she stuck by him even when he was accused of doping the horses at one point, which
Oh, interesting.
who knows? I can't believe, but maybe it was something that
He doesn't
happened.
seem the type, but
No, no. He
I
doesn't.
think he loved them too much. I think he respected the
Yeah,
animals too much.
yeah, I think so. But I do really
Interesting.
recommend reading Seabiscuit. It's a great
I
book,
love
and there's
that.
a film as well. This movie,
There is, yes, yeah. It's actually a very well done film.
is it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It definitely is. You get
Are you
all
a horse
the
lover?
feels. I am.
I thought so. I thought so. Have you got your own horses?
No, I was never allowed.
Oh,
My dad told me no, and my husband tells me no. So, so no horses for me.
well, you
Yeah,
could just
yeah.
sell lots of books and get your own.
This is what I've heard too. And, but then I'm at the stage where I'm like, well, but if I want to travel,
Yeah,
which
I
we
know
do
it's
love to
difficult.
travel, so it's that's why we don't have a dog anymore as
Mm,
well. Once our last dog passed, that was kind of it. So,
yeah.
you know,
Oh,
it's, but it's I have a deep respect for horses because I think they're incredibly intelligent,
yeah,
um, and they're very emotive, and which is interesting. If you spend enough time around them, they feel deeply, and I
yeah.
think that's what it draws me to them. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, they're wonderful animals. So I pretty much watch all the horse movies. Uh, Plus Kentucky with the where or I think that's what they did film the movie, I believe, on the actual estate.
did they?
And so I'm pretty sure. Um, and then you get the mist and the fog coming in the morning, early morning hours. It's just cinematography is
Wow.
beautiful.
Oh, I
So
must
it's
watch
worth the
that.
watch. Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's a good
will.
one.
I
It's
will.
definitely. So how about your writing process? How do you approach a story from idea to finished novel? I ask everybody this question
Mhm.
because I'm like, I love the diversity of
Yeah,
the answers.
yeah. Well, I've never met anybody else who does it exactly the way I do, but maybe there are out there. Um, so while I'm doing the research, you've got a vague shape of an idea in your head, but while I'm doing the research, I'm looking for that arc, the dramatic arc that I'm going to pull out that turns biographies into a story, because obviously completely different product. You can't include all the millions of diverse random facts that make up a life. So I'm looking for just one particular bit that will have a beginning and middle and an end for a story sense. And then when I've done enough broad general reading, I sit down and I write. I call it an outline. It's not really an outline. The last one was about 65,000 words. So what I do is I just write what's going to happen in every chapter. So I've got plot, character, not much dialogue at that stage, and I'm doing it very fast. So I'm not stopping to choose the nicest word or a lovely image. I just write the whole thing the way that the story is telling me it needs to go, get that outline down. I'll usually show that to my agent and my editors at that stage. And then I'll go back to the beginning and write line 1, paragraph 1, chapter 1, and do it that way. But I've got this complete roadmap of where I'm going. Because I did try it. My first 2 novels, I did try it. Just starting at the beginning and meandering off to see where I went. And that didn't work. Didn't work. Don't look at my first 2 novels.
We get better the more we practice, always.
I hope
That's with
so. I hope
anything.
so. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, no, my
absolutely.
outlines are about 2/3 of the length of the actual finished book. There.
That makes complete sense to me because
Yeah.
I actually kind of do something very similar.
Do you? Okay.
I write I tell myself the story first.
Yeah.
And so I write it all out. And then, like you say, I don't pick the nicest,
Yeah.
words and,
You do it
and
quite
turns
quickly.
of phrase. And but I'll put like random things like a picture of a map
Mhm.
so that it's a trigger for me of this is where I was going with it in my
Yeah.
brain, or I'll put a link to a website or
Yeah.
whatever. So my editor
Or
will
an XXX that you're gonna fill in
yes.
later.
Yeah, it's like, "Don't this they haven't told me what's happening yet here." Right? And so it's very interesting, and then my editor gets this jumble of things, but
Yeah.
the good thing is that she started to use that same process.
Okay.
So, for her own writing, so I'm like, "Okay, so I think we're thinking the same way,"
Good.
but I think that's really important, and I think you're right, everybody approaches it a little bit differently.
Uh-huh.
But and people who say that they're pantsers, I think they do it in their head. Like, I think they have kind of an idea of where everything's going, but they don't commit it to paper or
Well,
computer
some
or anything.
do, but I mean, I know Lisa Jewell, for example, when she talks about her process, she doesn't know beyond 2 pages ahead what's going to happen. She really
Really?
says she doesn't. She's got no idea. So
Wow.
it's a surprise to her as well.
Nice. Isn't that cool? What a
Mm.
discovery process.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
really, really
So
cool.
that just keeps it fresh and interesting for her.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Wow. That's amazing. It's quite astounding.
Yeah.
The creative process is just so beautiful in itself because of the many ways you can get there.
Yeah.
And I just, like you say, you can take the same characters and come up with a completely different novel
Mhm.
because of somebody's own personal life experience, what they've read, what they've seen, what
Sure.
they've heard, all those things. And then the way that they interpret the world. It's just, it's magical. It's
Mm.
really cool. We have the best jobs.
It's a very weird job sort of sitting down at your
It
desk
is.
in the morning pretending to be someone else.
Put them on like a coat and
Adopt their emotions and yeah.
yeah, pretty much.
Mm.
Exactly. That's why you have to be careful about who you write about
Yeah,
because it can infiltrate, right?
absolutely.
I was
And it's
told
like
I was a little
acting in
grumpy.
a way, isn't it, I suppose?
It is. Yeah,
Mm.
it is. And I need really quiet to write. So it's that I can immerse myself
Mm.
completely. But other people do so much better in like a noisy, busy cafe.
Or some
And
people
it's
have music on, which I can't do either. I would find that
isn't that amazing?
distracting.
Yeah. I just need everybody around me to not talk. It doesn't always work that way, but it's
Yeah,
a dream.
yeah.
So why don't you tell us what you've been reading lately? What has stood out for you that you
Well,
would
funnily enough,
say,
since we've been talking about horses, I came very, very late to discover Geraldine Brooks. And I read her novel Horse recently, and it's phenomenal. Absolutely
oh,
phenomenal.
really?
Now it's
I
set in and you will love it. If you haven't read it, Tanya, you will love it.
haven't.
It's set in 3 time frames. The first one, the main one, is the 1850s Kentucky, where there's
Okay.
this
Ooh.
very dignified black man boy when it starts out, and you can see from the chapter titles that he's owned by he's Alexander's Jarrett,
Oh.
he's
Ooh.
Tenbrook's Jarrett, he's somebody else's Jarrett. He goes through 3 owners, which is just chilling from the
I just
start. And
mm,
he comes very close near the beginning to being able to buy his freedom, but he's too good with horses. And one horse in particular that is born becomes Lexington, who was a great, great champion of the
huh?
1850s. And
Yeah.
Jarrett is the only person who can work with Lexington. So they're not going to let him go free but he has this
They don't want to
incredible
lose.
bond with the horse. He knows that horse like the back of his hand. And they just, he sleeps in the stall with him.
Oh.
And that's lovely, that bit. There's also a plot in the 1850s. And of course, the Civil War is, it's
Yeah.
looming not far off, and about what people are thinking and saying about that. And there's an artist who paints Jarrett with Lexington. Then you switch to 2019, and there's an art historian who's a black man in New York, or no, Washington, it is Washington, who comes across this painting that's been thrown out in the street. And simultaneously, there's an Australian girl who's an osteologist who finds the bones of um, Lexington in the Smithsonian Museum and starts trying to reconstruct to see what made this horse such a great champion.
Oh.
And then there's another plot in 1950s Manhattan with an art dealer and the painting. And it's just comparing and contrasting the racism of the 1850s with the racism of
Wow.
the 20th, 21st century. But it does so much else beside. But what you will love most about it, what I came away from, is just how beautifully she describes the relationship between Jarrett and Lexington.
I
It's
imagine
and
so.
I found Geraldine Brooks because lots of other actually on Facebook, lots of other authors saying, "Oh, you must read Geraldine Brooks. Oh, she's so great." And I've now got a list of recommendations of which ones I've got to read of hers next. I'm going to go through.
Oh,
I love doing that when you discover an author that just gets in
Mhm.
under your skin like that. You just want to go back and read their back bits
consume
straight
everything.
away.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is fantastic. And it's called Horse.
It's just called Horse, yeah.
Oh, that's easy to remember. So I will
Mm.
definitely be looking. See, my
Yeah.
stack just grew. I could like feel it like creaking above my head on the,
Yeah.
the bookcase. Oh, fantastic. That's a great recommendation. Thank you for that. That's so good.
Strange that it just tied
Oh,
in. We've been talking about horses anyway.
totally. It's perfect, actually. That's fantastic. I'm definitely going to go check that one out because it would be right up the relationship alone is just
Yeah.
that's where it's at. And I already know it's going to be a hard read emotionally. I can already
And
tell
then
that.
and then you have to go off and buy a horse afterwards.
Yeah. From your lips to God's ears.
I think you should. I think you should.
I'm thinking that's not going to happen, but thank you for the thought.
No, I think you should.
I've been vetoed on that one for
Oh,
sure.
well, I'm known for being a bad influence, so go for it.
I'll say, but Jill said.
I'm the bad
Well,
influence auntie to my nieces and nephews. I'm like, yeah, just go for it. Just do it.
I only live once, right?
Yeah, why
Why
not?
not? I think that's what you're supposed to do, though, as an aunt. You're supposed to be that instigator.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not a bad thing. Not a bad
I'm
thing
going
at
to
all.
email and remind you. Isn't it about time you bought a horse, Tanya?
Yes, I can see that coming. When you start seeing my feed fill up with horse pictures, you know.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Great.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful chatting with you. And it's I should tell everybody first before we say goodbye. Manhattan Girls and A Beautiful Rival. Those are the two books you need to run to the bookstore and pick up today. Fantastic reads. I'm so glad that we got to connect. I had wanted to connect with Manhattan Girls, and I literally just didn't manage to get it together in time.
Mm.
But I'm glad we did get to chat because and it gave me reason to read both books, which was really,
Oh, thank
really
you.
a blessing.
It's lovely
So
to
it
meet
was.
you. Well, meet, yes. But I
I
do feel like
know we've seen each other at a historical novel society conference, but
yes.
that was like pre-COVID,
Yeah.
and I find that everything pre-COVID feels like a
Ancient
different
history. Yeah.
life.
Different lifetime.
Different lifetime. We'll have like a historical marker for that. It'll be, post-COVID is different. So it's, yeah. But we will meet again. I'm sure you'll be coming to another conference. And
Definitely Las Vegas in
oh,
2025,
fantastic.
I think. Yeah.
Yes, that I'm planning to go as well. So
Okay.
we will
I'll see you
connect.
there.
I'll meet you at the bar. There's
Right.
always a bar in
There's
Vegas
always
somewhere.
several
So
bars. Yeah.
yes. But thank you again for taking the time to join us. It was wonderful to have you. And you've got your homework friends, so grab some books and settle in for a read this week. Bye.